Hello, everybody, and welcome to the White Hatter Studio. My name is Brandon.
I'm Darren.
And we're going to spend some time and talk about the upcoming Intimate Image Protection Act for British Columbia, because back in December, we found that the Attorney General had signed into order. The law will take effect on January 29th of this month.
Can I give a little bit of a caveat disclaimer before we get going? I think it's important that those who are watching know that we were consulted prior to the order being drafted as to what our thoughts were as subject matter experts. And then once that was done, we were also consulted. We've done this all pro bono because we think it's such an important topic. We worked with the BC civil tribunals here in or civil resolution tribunal. First thing in the morning, just got to bed on the reporting protocol associated with this. So we have some insight into what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, so I think we're going to start off and talk about the order that was signed by the Attorney General, because that's kind of the newest news of what's going to happen. And what we found in that order, and I actually did bring it up on that computer there, which we'll get to in a second. Okay. My initial reaction is it identifies the amount of money that someone can claim.
That we'll talk
so
about.
If their intimate images are shared without consent, you can receive monetary damages. It also outlines the ages for when a young person can apply themselves.
Yeah, because this applies to both young people and adults, right?
Yeah. So a young person who's nude, nearly nude, or intimate image is distributed without consent. At what age do they need a parent or guardian or trusted adult?
Right.
So there's some differences there. So actually, let's get right into the order.
The order. And I think it's important to know that this is a civil process, right? Like,
yes,
there's definitely a criminal process. Under the Criminal Code of Canada, we have the non-consensual distribution of intimate images, which is a criminal process, right?
Yeah.
This is a civil process that is being introduced here in British Columbia, and it's fairly unique, Brandon. But before we get into the order, there are other similar type of legislation in place across the country, correct?
So British Columbia will be the 8th or 7th province, if I recall correctly, that will have such a civil law put into place. And talking about the federal law and the other provincial laws, what's really interesting is there is no consensus. There is no... When it comes to intimate images, the definition changes quite a lot.
Yes.
So... Federally speaking, the law is pretty narrow.
Right.
It's really only talking about private skin showing. When you're talking about federally involving youth, it's much broader.
Right.
Even youth depicted is much broader.
Right.
And then some provinces include nearly nude in their definition of intimate images.
And sometimes that's the question: what does nearly nude mean? Although it may be reasonable or kind of common sense, you would think it's maybe not as common what people think it is, right?
Yeah. So British Columbia, Prince Edward Island, and there was one more province, can't recall off the top of my head, all include nearly nude in their definition of an intimate image. Federally, that doesn't exist. So essentially, what's interesting is that British Columbia's interpretation actually broadens the definition of what federally, criminally, is considered an intimate image.
Yeah, and I think the provincial legislation here in British Columbia, when we look at all the others across our country, they kind of learned from what other provinces have done and have created a document, as you will concede, that we think is more in depth and covers way more issues, including things like fake nudes, right? AI generated, kind of fake nudes and stuff that we will likely talk about in the session.
Yeah, so just kind of review, an intimate image under this British Columbia Act is someone engaging in a sexual act, being nude, nearly nude, or exposing genitals, anal region, or breasts. And that's the definition of what British Columbia is using. And in addition, what's interesting is that I thought to myself in that definition of breasts, the laws, because a couple years ago, British Columbia made all their laws gender neutral.
Right.
For equality, which is fantastic. So I wonder how that will be interpreted for different identities.
Hmm.
in
It'll be
regards-
interesting.
Yeah, I could definitely see a case for someone maybe making a claim.
Yeah. I mean, I think anybody can make a claim, but then it'll be up to the tribunal to make a decision. Does it fall within the legislation?
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me.
Another question that we get asked a lot is, in what situations does this law actually apply? And this is for when a nude or nearly nude or other intimate image is being distributed
Right.
without your consent.
Right.
So let's say somebody is in a relationship and the other partner takes that nude picture that they may have sent and they share that to someone else or to the public. Also, it also gives you the ability to withdraw your consent.
I think that's important. I mean, we know that in Supreme Court cases like Barbash, the Supreme Court justices made a suggestion that consent can be withdrawn at any time, right?
Yeah, but that was referring to those under the age of 18.
Right.
The consent revocable here, though, although it applies to all ages, it's only if you've given a person or a website consent
Right.
to actually share your nude image. Maybe you are someone sharing nudes on OnlyFans.
Right.
Or other websites might have black and orange in the title. You gave consent once, you can issue a demand saying, hey, stop sharing my nude.
Right.
And therefore they must take every reasonable effort in order to make those images no longer accessible to the public.
Right.
But unlike the Supreme Court with youth, the images to be deleted, that's not included here.
Right.
The Intimate Image Protection Act says it has to make the images non-accessible to the public. It doesn't mean someone has to delete their own personal copy
Right.
in their possession. To do that, you must seek a court order to do that.
Right.
So, again, there is no consensus across Canada on how to deal with these things, which I think is going to make things a little more challenging for Canadians across the country.
Right. But I still think that this piece of legislation from a civil standpoint is a real good step forward in helping to deal with this issue in most, not all cases. I'm sure we'll talk about that. But it's interesting, right?
In what cases do you think this will be most effective?
I think this is going to be most effective in cases where the individual who's non-consensually sharing or distributing the picture, the intimate image, is somebody who you know, love, or trust. Right? That's where I think that this is going to be very effective, right?
So you know who it is, you can name them, you can point to them going, this person shared my intimate image without my consent, here's who they are, make an application.
Right. I think that is where this is going to be extremely effective. Yeah. I think where we're going to see some challenges, however, to be very honest, in situations where maybe it's a sextortion issue with somebody who you don't know, love or trust, maybe from another country which doesn't recognize Canadian law or respect Canadian law, and maybe the picture, the video, whatever it is on a server in a country that doesn't recognize a Canadian piece of legal document, right?
Yeah, I actually got a question. I posted a video on TikTok the other day kind of talking about this act coming into effect, and I had a comment saying, what about in other countries, like the United States?
Right.
Would this still apply? Well, that's a good question.
Yeah. I think that there's, under the Mutual Legal Treaty Agreement or mutual...
The MLAT?
At the MLAT, there's a process there that can take place, but that can take over a year sometimes, right? The MLAT process. However, the question really comes in is, what if the person who's posting the picture is in Russia or in another country and it's on a server being held in those countries? Like, you can provide any kind of Canadian order on them that you want, and they can just blow it off, right? Like, that's going to be a challenge. But I think for individuals, especially when it comes to relationships, where an intimate image was shared consensually within a relationship with somebody who you know, love, or trust, I think that this is going to be extremely effective, and I think that this is a needed tool and another arrow in the quiver to help individuals who fall prey to this to deal with this issue. That's my thoughts.
Yeah, I can see that in regards to, now Canada has in the past worked with countries to enforce Canadian law on people who break the law.
Correct. But that's criminal, right?
Criminal, yeah.
That's on the criminal side of things. On the civil side of things, because remember, this is a civil order, it's going to be questionable if that can happen,
Well,
right?
couldn't the BC government make a civil case and work with another country in
They
order
could.
to?
But who's going to take that on? Who's going to pay for it, right? So
True.
it's going to be interesting. So I absolutely believe that this piece of legislation is going to be just a great arrow in the quiver to allow survivors, I don't like calling them victims, of survivors who fall prey to this because the person who they know, love, or trust took an intimate image that was shared with privacy and consent and trust, and then that other person weaponizes it and posts it as a weapon online. I think that this piece of legislation is going to be extremely effective in those cases.
Yeah, and there's two resources that the law provides residents. The first one is a legal order.
And what does that mean?
It means, so what's really unique about the British Columbia version of this is that they're tapping into the CRT, the Civil Resolution Tribunal.
Right.
And basically, it's an online court, which is kind of interesting. Canada was the first one to do that. So it's an online court.
Welcome to the online world, right?
So you log on and you make a claim, essentially, going, hey, and then some tribunal members, adjudicators, essentially, they basically review your application and then they'll give you an order if they...
Or not.
Or not, yeah.
Right.
It's not, again, they have to make an interpretation if your application is applicable.
Right.
And there's all kinds of different parameters for, is it actually a nude? Was there a sense of privacy involved there? There's other conditions to keep in mind,
Right.
but you don't have to go to a courtroom.
Right.
You don't have to travel to a court and spend a day in court. It's an online court.
And that's what's really beneficial to this, because traditionally you'd have to go to court. That takes time. Like trying to deal with this from a criminal perspective absolutely takes time, because you got to go to Crown. There's got to be a review on it. You know, it can take weeks or months for something. And even under a civil process, a regular civil process, that can take a long while. And the biggest...
we've heard from others, safety advocates in other provinces, and because other provinces don't have the online portal method, that their acts were never really fully utilized.
Correct.
Because it takes time for somebody in today's busy life to go through a court process.
Right. And the whole purpose of this is to expedite the process, to get the order so it can be served, to start taking these things down as quickly as we can, because that is the biggest concerns of a lot of survivors. Some of the, a lot of survivors, and full disclosure, we've dealt with many, many, many survivors of this, both adults and teens, right? And the biggest issue for them is not necessarily making an arrest or any kind of financial remunerations. Their biggest concern is that they want this thing down as quickly as it can.
And that's what the order provides.
Correct.
So making so the first resource is the protection order. Mm-hmm. So if there's a person who is distributing your nude without consent, or if your nudes are on a website without your consent being shared, this order allows you to say, hey, stop. Here is a legal court order that's basically saying to you, stop making these pictures available.
Right.
And they have to be taken down. And if they're not complied with, there are government fines that can be applied.
And what are those fines? Or are we going to talk about that later?
We can talk about the fines.
Okay.
So for an individual person who is sharing your nude image without consent,
adult or teen, or just doesn't matter?
Doesn't matter. This
Okay.
applies to everybody.
Okay. Which is important, right? Because this legislation applies to people who are either over or under the age of 18.
Yep.
Right? So.
A government fine of $500 per day, up to a total maximum of $10,000 as a government fine for not following this order. Right. And for any organization, so the
$5,000 is specific to an individual.
The 5,000 is for a company.
Oh,
the 500 is for an individual.
Gotcha.
For a company, so like an internet website that's hosting your news without consent and sharing them, it's $5,000 per day, up to a total of $100,000, and that was issued in the order from the.
We have the order, don't we? Yeah, we have it right here. Why don't you pull it up so people can see it?
Yeah, sure. It's going to be this one and that one.
Oh, so there it is, right there.
Yeah. I actually didn't realize that they signed it on December 18th.
Right.
which I think is kind of flew under our radar. We only just recently kind of found out about
But
it.
it comes to effect on January 2019 of this year, right?
Yes.
That's when it comes into
And
effect.
that's actually not that far away.
No, it's not. It's just a couple of weeks away, right?
Yeah.
So there's the order. And you can basically find this online right now, right?
Yes, it's not easily searchable in the Google search engine. You have to go to the BC government legislation website and actually like pull it up.
Can we maybe put an attachment in the notes at the end of the
I put a
presentation?
description, for people to read.
Why don't we do that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the order that was signed, and
what does the order basically say?
The order basically made it official that this law goes into effect on the 29th.
Right.
But in addition, the fines that can be applied.
Gotcha.
And also the ages of young people who can apply without a legal guardian or with a trusted adult.
So can you go back to big screen then and kind of maybe build upon that a little bit? Let's kind of push that out a little bit. What do you mean by that? Like teens have to be a certain age in order to apply for an order compared to applying for a financial remuneration?
Right. So there's the protection order where you can have your image deleted as a court order. But then there is also monetary claim for damages. And that's an entirely different process. And if you know that there's somebody and you can name them going, hey, this person or this company is sharing my nude image without consent, and you name them, you can have them pay you for the damages.
Okay.
Up to $5,000 for them doing that.
And you have to have an adult.
Yeah, so if a young person wants to get money out of this, essentially, they will need a legal guardian, essentially.
Gotcha.
Because it's a monetary thing and such. So they will need a legal guardian. If a young person wants to just have an order to take images down off the internet and stop them from being shared,
Then they don't.
Aged 14 and older can apply without any basically adult.
Right.
If they're younger, they will need a trusted adult.
Gotcha.
Doesn't have to be necessarily a parent or a caregiver, but they will need a trusted adult.
So that could include maybe somebody like a school counselor.
Yes. In the regulation that was signed by the government, it is quite a broad interpretation of what they consider as, a trusted adult.
Gotcha.
So you can check that for the details.
Cool.
And
again, we'll put a link to both the order and the legislation into the notes at the end of the live event.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that was all the main points I wanted to share today for the updates. I'm actually looking forward to this. We have been sharing with some student groups and parent groups that this is up and coming. It's also, it's retroactive.
Right.
So when the law came into effect, which was, when they make that law?
Last year.
Yeah. So if somebody was sharing your nude without consent between when the law was signed into force.
It was in March of 2023. Where third reading of the legislation was put into effect. So basically March of 2023.
Yeah. So in that time frame between then and now, if somebody is sharing your naked, nude, intimate image, you can still make an application when this comes into effect on the 29th. Anything else that we missed that might be important to share?
No, I mean, here's a really good example. Just recently, we helped a law enforcement agency here in Canada who was dealing with an incident at a school where some of the teens at the school were using artificial intelligence programs where they took pictures of other students, primarily females at their school, who were dressed, and then they would use the AI technology to remove the clothing to produce what AI believed to be the nudity underneath that clothing, which is illegal under the criminal code, right? That's being dealt with criminally. But here's a good example that incident could apply under the Intimate Image Protection Act, right? Because the act is pretty clear on deep fake technology.
Yeah, you pull that up
on this one here.
Yeah, it's in the first few part. Take a look here. It should be right. Yeah, there it is. Let me pull it up here and people can take a look at it.
where it says intimate image.
Yeah, image means visual recording, visual simultaneous representation of an individual, whether or not the individual is identifiable. And image has been altered in any way, which I think is really important, given that would include AI edited images.
Correct. So that's what's kind of cool about this legislation, is that it also covers the new deepfake technology that we're having to deal with right now, where people are weaponizing AI to create these intimate images and then posting them publicly, right? So this act would apply in those situations as well. So there's a good example where this is kind of taking place. So it's I'm quite excited. What's really interesting is that when we worked with the BC Civil Resolution Tribunal, we were a part of a committee in which there were experts, most of them PhD and lawyers from across the country, who came together to really drill down on a lot of these issues, right? And so it's pretty unique in its development. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if all the other provinces across our country look at this and kind of use it as a model.
Yeah, the other provinces would have to set up an online portal, an online court, essentially, similar to BC, which I don't see why they wouldn't. It's just so much more effective.
Yeah, it is, right? And I think what's really kind of cool is that when this thing actually drops, and there's another further announcement, then we're going to have some updates with respect to where you primarily are going to really drill down a little bit deeper, right, on the act to provide more information out there to both parents, educators, teens, counselors, and even adults on what this is and how it works and what you can do and all those types of issues as well. This is meant to be more of a quick hit to go, hey, listen, this thing is now in place. It's coming into act on later this month, on the 29th of this month. And when this thing drops, we're just waiting for the official announcement by the province. And when that happens, we're going to be providing more educational material on this so that people can learn, right, as to how they can use this as an effective tool if indeed they have been targeted for this tech-based facilitated sexual abuse, right? So where intimate images are weaponized and then posted publicly without consent.
Alrighty. Thank you all so much for joining us here live. The video will be available for replay, and we will check back with you probably closer, if not on the 29th, as this comes into effect. Stay safe, have fun, have a great time online.
See you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Good afternoon, Dr. Court. How you brought yourself to where you are today?
Wanting to be generous and accommodating.
Work with young people.
We decided to do some background research on these three major mobile ISPs, what's clearly prohibited and could in fact be a violation of their terms of service.
We thought this would be an opportunity to create a video about general buying and selling safety tips on the internet.
Created a version 2 that they call the Donashi Scholar, and which is specifically designed for youth, about a new mobile phone that was on the market called the Wise Phone.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Unanswered Questions. Sometimes we just don't get enough time to answer all the amazing questions from students during our live broadcast. Recent bug in Meta, Facebook, and Instagram proves you cannot always trust a password. AI cybercrime is happening right now and is likely going to be happening more. We wish to recognize these extraordinary and outstanding people by presenting them with the White Hatter Medallion.